So welcome back as well. This is the first of a new term of Etc. Talks. So this is also the first talk of the academic year for us. It's heading up our autumn term, which covers September, October, November. And for the next 3 months, we've got a particular focus on graphite. So our Etc. Talks are all featuring artists who work in graphite, although are not limited by that as the medium. So that's just a little bit of a thread to connect our three artists for this month. Sorry, for this term, but Leggy Gordon is going to be our artist this month. And I don't want to kind of over introduce her because she's going to be talking a lot about her own practice. She's a London based artist with a bit of a focus on drawing and printmaking in her practice. But I might just hand straight over to you if that's okay, Leggy, just to say hi.
Yeah, sure. Am I on mute? No.
No, you're not. No, there we are. We can see you. Welcome. It's lovely to have you here. Thanks so much for agreeing to do this.
No, not at all. It's a pleasure.
I'm going to just launch straight into your slideshow if that's okay, because we've got such rich imagery to work from and to look at today. So I'm just going to hop over to the slideshow and I'll just put us on main slideshow there. So hopefully everyone's going to be able to see in just a second. So you've put together this range of images for us today, and we're kind of starting on sketchbook pages. So tell me more about what we're looking at here.
Well, I thought I'd start with sketchbooks just because when I did illustration as my degree and I loved it, but I did feel that always working to an illustration brief was quite, I mean, limiting is probably the wrong word, but just sort of I sort of felt there was other things that I wanted to do. Like I always loved the live drawing classes and the things that were less kind of about box ticking. And I have, in fact, I've got them here. There's all of these sketchbooks that I um just of like daily life, just like things that I would do. I would just always have it with me. And I think that's when I got into doing these sort of like I would draw people that were around me, but then also, like settings like the one on the bottom right is during lockdown. That's my mum during lockdown. And the bottom left is my bedroom. Just like things that were uninteresting just became things to be interested in when we were in lockdown. And then also getting into doing things like the one on the top left
Mhm.
is sort of more of a memory drawing of things in my childhood and things like that. So I was sort of a mishmash of like things from my everyday life and then things that were more imagined or memory based or to do with my childhood, things like that.
What's your
So
process for
yeah.
memory-based drawing?
Um, well, I think I've got a real attachment to my childhood, which is obviously a lovely thing. But I would I would look at what I do quite a lot is I will look at photographs and they'll trigger a memory and then I'll think, oh, oh yeah, I remember that and I remember this and I like vividly remember the feeling of doing that. So then I might take some facial expressions or slight, like the angle of something and then basically take it away from the photograph and then just embellish it with all the things that I feel like embellishing it with.
And do you do a lot of observational drawing to kind of build that bank of visual imagery as well?
Yeah, definitely. And that's definitely because I was at the drawing school and the drawing year, and that was definitely something that was really, really helpful there is that you're constantly drawing, you're drawing people, you're drawing buildings, you're drawing outside, you're drawing inside, you're drawing from museums, you're drawing everywhere. So you just are constantly building on this sort of folder of I don't know, positions and colorways and compositions and things like that.
It's good you bring up composition because I think there's a great sense of composition in these sketchbook pages. Is this sort of indicative of how all your sketchbook pages look, kind of going right out to the edge of the paper and making use of that compositional space?
Yeah, I mean, these ones are very much like ones that were spanning across both pages. I've got lots that are kind of like I'll draw someone's hand on one side and someone's, I don't know, their food on the other side, and then draw a pattern on one side. They're not all as curated as these ones, but yeah, I think that was another thing because I'm quite precious when I draw. I'm not someone who can just like throw paint at a wall and just kind of hope for the best. I'm very considered. So I think that's what was so good about doing all of these sketchbooks is they're just for me. They're not going to be seen by anybody. So I can make them visually appealing to me, but they're still documents of just it's like a diary, but
Mhm.
just visual diary.
apart from when people make you drag them out and put them on
Yeah,
site like this.
today.
Thank you for sharing it with us as well. Could I switch on to the next slide?
Please do, please do.
Because then this is sort of out of sketchbook work. So tell me what's going on here.
Yeah, so this was another this was like one of my first sort of entry points into printmaking. So these are monoprints, but they're very kind of drawing based monoprints. So you ink up a piece of glass or a piece of plastic or something, and then you put a piece of paper on the ink, and then you just draw with a pencil. And then when you take it off, you get this sort of fine line, but it's sort of almost blurry. And this was actually from my degree, and it was a project that was I based on like the home and the meaning of the home and how objects and places hold meaning. And I wanted them to have that sort of hazy, sort of, I don't know, sort of film photograph effect, and I found it through monoprint. Yeah, and that's how I got into printmaking really. And I think this is another, it was sort of like, again, during lockdown, I'd been drawing, so many things that I would never usually draw because they were just things that are in my house that
Yeah.
I'm just so used to seeing. So I wanted to sort of take them out of the sketchbook and make them into more kind of substantial pieces. But yeah, all about the home and how much the home can be a good thing, a bad thing. It's just holds so many kind of memories. Well, for me, it does anyway. Yeah.
I did one phrase I loved from your biography was family folklore. The idea of kind of family folklore. Could you elaborate on that at all?
Well, I just feel like that's so kind of relevant to the way that I work. It's just so much based on my I mean, my family, the people that I love, the things that are just part of my everyday life, and sort of things that are um I don't know, they might not be, they feel unique to my family. So it's sort of things that people might be able to sort of resonate with the idea of having some weird tradition that only your family has, but it's never going to be the same as my tradition. So you'll see something in a piece of work and you're like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't do that, but I know of those sort of things that I do with my family or with my friends or with my partner or whatever it is. Um, and yeah, I just have so many of these like weird snapshots from my childhood that I want to kind of put onto paper.
I'm going to hop to the next slide if that's okay. And so does that relate to some of these images?
Yeah, so massively so. So the one on the top left, this was another entry point into printmaking, was lino. It's just, I found it really useful actually because I usually work in such fine line. It was I mean, I haven't done that much more lino print since I did these, but it was quite interesting for me to go from working in such fine line to working in like block
Mhm.
colors, and very kind of just black and white. And yeah, so the top left is based on family memory, very very specific memory, and then the one underneath is just moments that I've had with friends where it's just like, this is just such a funny setup that everyone goes to someone's house and they have a weird setup, and I just thought it's kind of funny to remember it through a print, sort of my friend holding my dog, and then my other friend just casually draping some grapes in her hand. Just, it was such a kind of odd scene but kind of so normal at the same time.
I guess as with writers who immortalize characters around them in their writing, but maybe take them a step away from their naturalistic state. Like, do the people that you're representing, what's their relationship to your work, to what you make about them?
um I think people find it quite funny, really. they're sort of, they're sort of flattered, but also sort of like, oh yeah, that's like, the one at the top is my mum, and she's like, oh, you can't draw me like that with my bikini top like hanging off. It's just sort of things that are kind of, again, moments that are kind of so irrelevant, that then become relevant through making a piece of work about them.
And Do art historical references come into your work a lot as you're designing compositions?
Well, for the top left one, of course, it did. But I mean, yes and no. Like I with the drawing school again, we did a lot of drawing from the National Gallery, and although I didn't necessarily take compositions from the ones that I saw, it was definitely a lesson in like how what looks good and what doesn't look good. And I mean, I wouldn't be able to tell you what those things are, but you just know it when you see it. You just think, oh well, that makes sense for it to
Mhm.
be like that. And like, you know, I've done drawings before where I've thought, oh, it's fine, but the composition's definitely not right. Like if I was to do it again, I would fix it. But yeah, definitely through drawing, which they're in later on. There are some slides with drawings from galleries and museums, and I definitely learned a thing or two from doing that.
Oh, well, I'll click through to our next one. Look, I love this image on the left.
The bird.
Um, yes, yeah, it's wonderful. I don't even know if I want you to explain it because it's so wonderful itself. But tell me more about it.
um yeah, it's a bit dark, but it's basically I sort of it was basically a depiction of me feeding myself negative things. It was a sort of, I don't know, I was just thinking a lot about the way that I exist and the things that I read and the things that I say to myself. And it just kind of felt like this is just negative things, but it's sort of, I mean, it's almost like social media. You keep scrolling and it's very addictive, but you know that it's not good for you. So that just basically is an image of me indulging in all the things that I know are bad for me, but I still keep doing them.
And the selection that you've chosen to go alongside it as well. Tell me more about those images.
So these again are ones that are based on like sort of meetings with people or just times that I've been with people, and I've just thought this would be a funny drawing. Like the bottom one, I was with two of my very, very old friends from primary school even, and we were just on a walk together. It was sort of on the tail end of lockdown where you were sort of allowed to see a small group of people. Um, and it was just again, it was such an odd situation, and we were just there kind of walking around, staying relatively far away from each other. And we stopped to say goodbye, and obviously we didn't really touch each other, and it was just like all of these weird things, like an airplane flying by and these weird signs, and I just thought this is such a strange thing, but it's so normal right now to what we're doing. And the top right one is of my mum, and that was another lockdown thing. So we obviously you're allowed a walk a day, so we would go on these dog walks, and I just was trying to find something other than the inside of my house to draw. So I made her stand next to a tree. Thought it would be make a nice composition.
Would you, because you were saying you were in the drawing year after lockdown. So does that mean you were still on your BA at this point, or was
um, we went into lockdown as I was about to graduate from my BA, and then I had a year out through the bulk of COVID, and then went into the drawing year the year after that.
so that must have been quite an intense period to be drawing whilst outside of that educational structure.
Yeah, and I mean, God, the first Zoom class at the end of my BA, like we had like a month left of our degree, and it was all suddenly via Zoom, and it was so alien then. It wasn't like now where it's you know how to do it. It was sort of like with your tutor, like, hello, this is awkward. I'm in my bedroom. Uh, but yeah, no, it was weird, and it was. I think it was quite interesting. I think I mainly work from home anyway, so I think for me in terms of making my own work, not that much change other than the fact that I was doing it more because I was at home. Um, so obviously it was a horrible situation, but in terms of being able to work all the time, it was quite nice. I just could do it whenever I wanted.
So do you think that experience at that quite pivotal moment, do you think it did influence the development of your work, or just run in parallel with it?
I think it did in terms of the type of work that I was making actually, because I think there was a definite shift from when I left my BA to then 2 years later when I did the drawing year, um, it suddenly became much more imagination based and much more kind of about things that I've remembered. So a lot of memory drawing, because again, there was not I couldn't go to a live drawing class, or I couldn't be on my actual course. So I think that definitely shifted. And I got really into lino printing in lockdown because I could do it from home with a little roller. Um, and yeah, definitely I was looking at a lot of art books, looking at a lot of compositions through books, and yeah, definitely took on more of an imaginary world in that period between my BA and between going on the drawing year, those 2 years in between.
Can I click through to the next image?
Oh, yeah, good, good.
Because this is around the same time. This is sort of 2021 after that.
Yeah, so this was right at the beginning of the drawing year actually, and it was just the first. I mean, I'd used charcoal before in live drawing, but I'm so obsessed with precision that I always found it quite painful using charcoal and trying to kind of like force myself into it. But I didn't, especially for live drawing, I just never really clicked with it. But then at the drawing year, there were lots of classes that were kind of, they were life drawing classes. So there was a model, but they weren't just you're drawing the model. It was like, okay, you're going to draw the model, and then you're going to imagine a scene from 2 weeks ago, and you're going to put the model onto that scene. Or you're going to draw the model, but you're going to put how you're feeling into that model's face. Like just things that weren't traditional life drawing. And that really helped me with using charcoal and using mediums that I'm not so familiar with, just because it's sort of, I don't have to precisely draw the model as
Mhm.
I see them, because it's more about the imagination as well as your direct surroundings, which I thought was so interesting. I'd never done a life drawing or just a drawing class like that before.
Mhm.
Um, and that definitely really helped the way that I can compose things.
Was that what you were looking for on the drawing year as well? Something that would challenge your previous ways of working?
Yeah, I think so. And I think also I just started getting into this like more imaginary side of my work. And I desperately wanted just to just keep doing it. And obviously the drawing year seemed like the perfect way to do that. But I applied and I didn't get in, and I then applied again and got in the second time. So I mean, just worth saying that if you don't get into something first time, you can always try again.
That's hopeful as well for everyone. Um, People understand that. So these are some you were describing earlier, how on the drawing you were encouraged to work from other artists' work. So is that what some of this is?
Yeah, yeah. So these are just drawings from the National Gallery, and they just, they're not, particularly interesting drawings, but they compositionally, it really helped me to do drawing from other people's work. And also with color, because I don't use color that often, but when I do, I find it quite difficult. I tend to get very carried away, and I think I'm going to limit myself to a certain palette, and then as the drawing goes on, I'm getting more pencils in and more pencils in and more pencils in. And it was just really nice to just go and just draw from something that's already got colors. I can see the colors that I can see, and those are what are going onto this. And it just taught me that you can draw with a limited palette. You don't have to keep adding, even if it's not what you're completely seeing. It still doesn't mean that it's it. I mean, obviously, there's no right and wrong. So yeah, it just taught me a lot.
So talk to me a bit more about your attitude to kind of visual representation, because you're looking hard to make these drawings. You're observing intently, and the way you're sort of talking about it, you're obviously using drawing as a tool for visual exploration. But like, what's your attitude to representing something? What your attitude to the notion of kind of visual accuracy? Is it important to you?
Um, well, sort of again, yes and no. I mean, I used to be very, very precise and think, oh God, well, those proportions are wrong. I need to completely start this again. And then I think I suddenly realized that it doesn't have to be sort of proportionately correct or whatever it is for it to make a good drawing. And I think I started to work with, because I'm so, like, by nature I'm just very precise about things, and I think I would go so into detail on one thing. So I'd draw someone's eye in such detail, but then I'd be like, oh, but it doesn't make sense with the rest of the face. This is wrong. But then I think I just accepted the fact that I can draw almost like a patchwork. So I can draw one eye and then draw the other eye. If they don't really match, it doesn't really matter. It makes it more interesting to me. Um, but I still fall into the trap of thinking, oh God, that's not visually, that's not aesthetically exactly right. Proportions are wrong. That's wrong. I need to start again. But then I always prefer the drawings that I make when they're not proportionately correct.
um, how has your background in illustration, your kind of degree before the drawing year, influenced the way that you're thinking about drawing? Or how do you think that's kind of significantly influenced how you're approaching drawing?
Yeah, I think in some ways it has. I think quite a lot of the work that I make now and that I've made in the last few years is quite sort of heavy on the narrative or on the sort of symbolism, and I think that's definitely come from my illustration background. Um, because you know you want something to represent something, even if it's not kind of immediately obvious. And I think, yeah, that because with the well, with an illustration degree, I mean, not necessarily with an illustration like career, but you know, there's a lot of box ticking. There's a lot of kind of, well, you need to make sure that you're conveying this and you're symbolizing that and you're making sure that it's can be understood easily by the viewer or the reader or whoever it is. Um, so I think in terms of the work that I make now, it's more kind of narrative heavy or symbolism heavy than it would be had I not done an illustration degree. But
Mhm.
maybe it would, I don't know. Who knows?
But you're not having to work towards a brief. You don't have to answer a question. I mean, you
Yeah,
can
no.
ask questions, right?
The only questions I'm answering are the ones in my head. So it's not, I'm not, you know, I'm not trying to tick any boxes. I'm just ticking my own boxes.
With opportunities to exhibit your own work, how do you find the works received by other people?
um, I think there's a particular piece that I've, you know, if in the position of being, you know, trying to be an artist, you know, apply for things or um enter things. And I think there's one drawing that, oh, and it's actually an etching, but it always seems to be the one that people are interested in. I think because it's so small, I think there's such an emphasis on being doing things that are big. And I think I again I always think, oh, I need to go bigger, I need to go bigger. But I think there's something that's quite interesting about doing something small because you have to get really close to it to look at it. Um, so I don't know, maybe that.
I'm going to hop through to the next slide if that's all right, because this now feels like a real change.
Oh yeah, so this again, this was quite early on in the drawing year, and it was just again, it was that thing of like we're drawing the model, but also we're going to then take it and change it into something else and add your own imaginary imagery onto it. And I so the drawings in the top left hand corner are all drawings from the class of drawing the model and drawing the model's hands and drawing my own hands. And then basically we were asked to arrange those in a certain way and then basically fill in the blanks. So the drawing of the man with his fist is, I think the fist is a drawing that I did in the class. The feet and the knees are also from the class. And then the rest was basically attaching them together. And again, it was something that I just found really interesting. I'd never ever thought of doing that sort of thing before because I'm so precise. Again, just trying to like carbon copy what I can see in front of me. But this was just completely the opposite of that, really. It was taking something in front of you and then putting it together with something that's completely imagined. And then that just led to the liner print and then painting onto a jug. It just like I just found it interesting of taking one thing and then developing it and developing it and developing it until it becomes a completely different thing.
Had you
And we also
worked?
did.
Oh, sorry, go on.
Oh no, you go on, girl.
Oh, I was just going to ask whether you'd worked on a three-dimensional surface before.
Um, Not really. That was one of the first things that I'd done like that. And then I got quite into it, and now I actually work in in a pottery cafe, so I do it all the time now. Um, but yeah, that was very much like I went to one of these places and I just thought I don't want to paint, I don't want to cover it in polka dots or something. I want to do something that I'm actually going to visually like. So I was like, well, why don't I just paint one of my lino prints onto it? Um, but it's interesting painting something physical. It does feel very different to painting something flat because there's the 3D surface to it.
And compositionally, you've got a continuation of the narrative all the way around. So you can keep turning and you can just get stuck in a vortex of imagery.
Yeah, completely. It just keeps on going.
Have you developed on that? I mean, apart from the pottery cafe.
I've done a couple of other I think there's one further on in the thing, but I also did this, which is just happens to be right here, but it's the same image. Clearly, I'm obsessed with that image, but in a bowl. Um, and we did another one. I think it's on the next slide, but we did drawing from a film at the drawing school quite a lot, and that was also really helpful this way because you take one scene that you've because it was very very fast paced, which I'm really terrible at, so just trying to keep up with the film and then taking these like ridiculous crazy scribble drawings that you've done in the dark while you're watching a film on a projector and then taking them and developing them into something else. And one of the drawings that we did from film I've ended up making an etching out of it, painting it on a jug. So I think that was something that was really interesting to me about the drawing. Yeah, oh yeah, there it is. um is just that element of taking one thing and then using that to develop the work, rather than, I think what I was quite guilty of before was just like coming up with an idea and then just thinking I'm going to make that. But of course things are always more interesting when you've taken something and developed it and then tested it in different mediums and with different materials and then come up with something that's more developed, I guess, rather than just thinking, oh, that would be an interesting drawing and then trying to make it happen immediately. um
So the order with this one was the top left-hand corner first.
Top left, in fact there was probably one before that that was much more of a scribble. Then the one with the red I did on the day but after the film had finished. Then it became the little etching, and then it became the jug.
And has that is that something that you've taken and woven into your work now, or is that something that very much existed in its own time?
I still do, but less kind of less with less immediacy. So I still have a bunch of drawings from the drawing school or from any live drawing classes, or drawings from sketchbooks and stuff like that, that are just from everyday life. And then I think of something that I want to draw, and then I think, oh, I've probably got somebody in that position in one of my sketchbooks or from one of my drawings from this period of time. So then I'll go through them and see, oh yeah, I've got that already. So I can, instead of trying to find a reference photograph, I can reference a drawing so that it's less kind of I'm just drawing a photograph.
Mhm.
Um, so yes, but also in a slightly different way.
Does pattern play a big role in your work?
Yeah, I think it does, but sort of unintentionally. I sort of end up always having some element of pattern. Um, I think it's probably part of the detail thing. I just like details, and that's with pattern you can get carried away with detail without it becoming too hyper realistic or whatever whatever it is that I don't want to happen. Um, Not
What,
that I can draw hyper realistically at all.
what is there a reason that you would shy away from that as well?
Um, I think with my own work, if I try and get something to be too realistic, it's never hyper real. So it's not in that kind of world, but it's sort of too realistic to be interesting
Hmm.
and not real enough to be like, wow, that's incredible. So it sort of is neither here nor there. So I'd rather just kind of go more towards the kind of sort of odder, weirder side of things than to try and try and do hyper realistic drawings, which I can't do.
That's a really nice way of putting it. Um, so tell me about these four.
Um, so these are also well, so the blue one is actually, that was what I was saying earlier about patchworks. That was in a class where um we were drawing with mirrors. So you just had a very small mirror and looking at different parts of your face, and that really helped me be able to do that thing of just like drawing one detail and then moving over to the other detail. So it's a self-portrait. It looks nothing like me, but it's I it's the same thing. I prefer how it comes out when it doesn't really look like me than how it would if it was sort of anatomically and visually correct. And then the other ones, the one of the tree and the one in the boat, they're both kind of memory drawings that I don't even know if, well, the one on the left, I don't even know if it's real. It's my brother sitting in a tree looking at my grandmother and her friend who were into being nude, naturalists. And I remember the story that I saw them, and I was like, oh my god, that's so funny. And everyone else remembers it that it was my brother that saw them. So who knows what's real and what's not. But I kind of like that. It's sort of like, well, it's a sort of memory, but it could be completely made up. It could have been
Mhm.
neither of us. It could have been him. It could have been me. But I just thought it would make an interesting drawing.
And what's the significance? Is it the Long Man of Wilmington there?
That in Sussex, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it was in Sussex that,
Okay, okay. So
yeah.
that's
And I, again, it's that we wouldn't have been able to see that from her house, but I just remember going very vividly as a child. So it's sort of trying to piece together just elements of things that I remember one situation and putting them into one space.
How do you select a viewpoint in your mind's eye for these memory drawings particularly?
Um, I think so, well, the one with the boat, that sort of vaguely came from a photograph of me and my brother with my dad sitting in a boat. The angle was slightly different, but it's sort of that thing of when you see a photograph and you remember it, but do you remember it through the photograph or do you actually remember it? So it's sort of trying to combine those two things. So the one in the boat is sort of sparked by a photograph, but also then my version of how it was in my head. Um, and then sort of specific things that were involved. So like at the bottom of that one, there's a little empty drinks can, and that's just a drink that I remember my dad drinking a lot when we were little. So just kind of random things that are sort of relevant but completely irrelevant at the same time.
When I was a child, I recounted to my mother an out of body experience I had when I'd fallen off of a bicycle when I was a little kid. And I really thought that I had actually ascended into a spirit realm and was looking back at my own body. And she played me back the family video that she'd actually taken. And what I was remembering was just watching the family video.
Watching the film.
But
Yeah, it's
but I
weird.
turned into something really profound in my
Yeah,
mind.
yeah.
It's a
I
funny
had an out of body experience.
thing. Um, how about the memory of the person riding a fish on the wall? What's going on here?
Well, that is more specific. So I actually that's do you know Charleston House in Sussex?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's one of the fish and the man is based off a bit of painting on, I think it was on a table that I saw there. And I was there with a couple of friends, and that's how that came about. That one's
Mhm.
less interesting, sadly. It's just copied from someone else.
No, it's great because also I think if I wasn't asking so specifically, there's room for us to read our own ideas of kind of a personal history into
Yeah,
these.
yeah. I think
So,
that's the thing. That's what I like. I mean, I don't know what people think of my work or what people get from it, but I like to think that obviously a lot of it is very specific memories to me, but you can sort of take it and you might have a similar situation, or it might trigger a memory of your own of something different, but to do with the same thing, or something like that.
thank you. I'm gonna hop to the next. So on to etching.
Yeah. So I got very into etching for I was really, really into it. I mean, I still am, but I just get to do it less just because of the nature of not having a printing press. Um, but I actually got really into doing etchings. They're not technically etchings, dry point prints on the inside of like juice cartons or milk cartons. And so the bottom left one is a proper etching on metal, but the other two are from the drinks packaging. And I think I initially I thought, oh, this kind of cheats etching, but then I actually, the more I did it, the more I was like, oh, I prefer it, because you can get a finer line with the drink cartons.
Hmm.
Something about the fact that you don't have to properly scratch it. You can just make a little mark and it will show up. I just really liked, and obviously there's much less acid and dangerous things involved with just using a milk carton. Um, and you can do it anywhere. So I got very into that. I mean, obviously I loved doing the proper ones as well. Like I loved using the aquatin, and it was so interesting seeing the bottom one with the octopus. It was really, that started off with no aquatin in the background. Um, and it was so interesting to see how it changed with the aquatin and without it. It just looks like a completely different image.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I think with etching as well, I just love the fact that I can still be very, very precise, because I like precision and using pointy tools and doing very like small detailed things, but you still don't have, there's an element of risk and an element of the fact that you actually don't know how it's going to turn out. You can think you know what it's going to turn out like that, but when you actually do the print, it can be completely different to how you imagined, which is I like, because with a drawing you know exactly what's happening when you're doing it, whereas with an etching you don't. You you can plan and plan, but it might come out completely different to how you'd expected.
And I guess the development of the image is happening in a very different way in an etching, where you are able to make those significant changes to the way the image is coming across with adding the aquatin in the background, as opposed to
Yeah,
just
yeah. Yeah, and I think also, especially with the milk carton things, you can only get about 10 good prints from them. So there's, I quite like the fact that it's kind of, it's not infinite. You can get multiple images, but it's not going to go on forever. It's there's there's a limit.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and also a lot of them are based on drawings that I'd already done. Like the one in the top left hand corner is of a friend that started off. It in fact was on the first page in a sketchbook.
Mhm.
Um, and you can, it's that same thing of taking something that you've just done quite quickly and then taking it and making it into something more solid.
Mhm.
Um, which I like about it. And I also love the plates. I love holding on to the plates. They're just nice objects to have.
And I mean, it's very drawing adjacent, isn't it?
Yeah.
But does it feel very different? Does it feel like it's within a similar area to you?
Um, I mean, it's similar for me in that I can use a very fine point to do it, but I think the what feels new and exciting to me about doing etching is that that kind of isn't really, you make a mark and it's kind of, it's quite permanent straight away. You can't necessarily, well, you can't, I mean, unless you burnish and blah blah blah, but you can't, it's a whole process if you want to change something, whereas with the drawing you can just change it easily. And I quite like that, because it sort of takes the element of control out of it, because you're limited by the materials, so you can't be like, well, this is flippant because I can just keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it until I feel that it's right. It's just, that's it, it's done.
Mhm. Exciting. I'm going to hop to the next, if that's all right.
Yeah.
So tell me about these images.
So these are quite, so the one I was talking about earlier, the really small one, is that etching in the middle, and these are all when I was at the drawing school, I had a I had a double mastectomy, and I just found it to be, I mean, taking the silver linings, it happened to just be a really, I mean, source of inspiration is probably the wrong word, but I wanted to capture the emotion that is involved in
Mhm.
something like that, and having a big surgery, or going through something like that, or seeing someone else having a big surgery, or something big happening to somebody. Um, and yeah, I don't know, there's just something that I liked, which sounds weird, but just it was quite cathartic, drawing yourself at your lowest point, and then turning it into something that's just like, yeah, that's done. It's a drawing now. Can put it aside. Um, but yeah, obviously it's quite weird to draw yourself crying. Yeah, that's where those came from.
was there a point where you weren't able to work? I mean, it just emotionally as much as anything.
Yeah,
Did
definitely.
yeah.
Definitely. That was it. Yeah. I mean, I because I was halfway through the drawing year when it happened, I it's quite good. I was after the holiday, it was during the Easter holidays, so I was quite lucky in that I was forced back into working because the term started. So I was pushed straight back into it. I think if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have got into it back into it as quickly as I did. Um, but I think I just wanted to turn it into something worthwhile rather than it just being this thing that happened and it's like, oh well, that's that. But I think a lot of my work, regardless, is about kind of sentimental things or things that are important. I mean, not to everyone, but to me. And so, aside from the fact that I wanted to put it onto paper, um, it felt like the right thing to do, and it felt like a good way to sort of deal with the situation by trying to. It's almost like writing something down. Just you're
Mhm.
getting it out.
And was it a good way of dealing with those physical changes in your body as well?
I think so. I think it was just it was interesting. It was interesting to document for sure because it's sort of like I was looking at myself in a way that I wouldn't have done had this not happened. And it really was like a visual diary. Like the ones on the right, I mean, I did before the surgery, so it was kind of like I didn't want to go, taking photos of myself before it happened. It felt wrong, but doing drawings, it felt like okay, I'm documenting it how I see it because it's my body and it is going to change. So I've got those now, and that's that they're still there. That existed. That was a time where that existed, and I've documented it, and so I can move forward with it. Um, so yeah, it was an interesting exercise for sure.
It's amazing to have maintained a practice like whilst going through something so significant.
Well, I mean, I definitely had some time off. I can assure you.
Yeah, good. Um, was it strange to come back to to the course and your kind of classmates after that period?
Um, yeah, I mean, I have to say the everyone was so supportive and lovely. But yeah, it's quite a it was a big change to happen halfway through doing a course like the drawing year, which is quite short and it's a year. So I mean, it feels definitely like there was a before and an after when I think back to that year. But I think, I mean, to say I'm glad that it happened is definitely an overstatement. But it's, I don't regret making the work that I did from it and how it happened and when it happened because it made me make work that I wouldn't have made had it not happened. So at least there's that.
It's an amazingly positive framing for it. It's incredible.
Well,
Um, so,
so
sorry,
I
go.
can't.
No, just tell us about your drawings here.
Well, I just put these in just because I thought I hardly ever work in color. Um, and these are both examples of me trying my hardest to have a limited palette. I mean, it worked better with the one on the left than the one on the right because I see a color in someone's face. I'm like, well, I must add it in to the drawing. Um, but yeah, I mean, nothing other to, about these to say than other than the fact that they're just few of the works that I've done in color. And I really like working in color when I do it, but I find it more I don't know if this is like a universal thing, but I find it involves much more brain activity because I'm considering so much more than just like the sculptural element of something or how I want someone's expression to it. Because then there's also the color that goes into that as well. It's not just like, oh, I want them to be looking like this and I want that to be there and this to be that and that to stand out. Because then there's the whole element of the fact that there's infinite colors to choose from. um, so I find color very difficult to use. Um,
Do you
hence
work
why.
it? Do you ever paint?
Um, not really. I've painted a bit, but I sort of get what's the word, like decision fatigue when I try and paint. It's like there's too much to consider. I think if I keep it simple, then I don't have to be thinking about all the considerations that come in with color. I mean, obviously, oil painting is like a whole other practice in itself, and I would never claim to be an oil painter. I've done like 2 oil paintings in my life. I would love to get into painting more. I really would. But I just find it so difficult.
It's all right. You're in good company with people that so there's no need to feel that pressure. You've got drawing and printmaking. That's plenty to keep you busy.
No, I love doing it, but I just never like the results.
Maybe it's, who knows what your artistic practice has in store. Painting one
Um,
day. Um,
um,
yeah, so tell me about these.
yeah, these ones are more so more printmaking on the left. This is after I'd done the drawing year. And the etching on the left was on a new type of, it was on like perspex, and that was something I hadn't done before, so that was just why I put it in, just because it's sort of, perspex sort of feels like it's somewhere in between the milk cartons and using metal. You can get that more kind of slightly scratchy line that you'd get on metal with the perspex, but then I don't know, it's quite flat. I think that's the problem with using perspex. You can't really get any tone with them. So yeah, and then the other one is again sort of venturing into color, but I went through a phase of doing quite a lot of drawings that were sort of monochrome but with color instead of just pencil, which is a happy medium for me. Less decision, just having to choose one color.
There's a different vibration in the eye, though, isn't there, when you're working in color?
Yeah, it has a, it really changes something. Like if that had been in black and white or in pencil and paper, whatever, I don't think I would have included it. It wouldn't have been interesting. And I also did that on paper that I've only used once or twice. It's very, very, I think it's Japanese, very, very, very thin. So if you hold it up to the light, you can see through it. Which was another thing that was interesting, working on paper that's also working with you, because I mean, if you press too hard, you will tear it. There's no going back if you rip it. So I think that was another interesting way of drawing, because you sort of, I went a lot slower with it because I didn't want to be too kind of aggressive. I took it very slowly. So yeah, two new mediums in one.
And this is bringing us up right to the present year.
Yes. Um, so the one on the right is more, so it's that same thing of kind of like taking a moment that's sort of an uninteresting moment, really, but kind of funny. Like I was with my boyfriend and he needed a wee, so I went for a wee, and we're in a place where just suddenly grasshoppers just erupted out of everywhere. And I just thought, oh, it'd be a funny drawing. And that's bigger than I'd usually work. That's like tall. So yeah, that's how that one came about. And again, that's really heavy on the pattern. I think that's another thing where it's taking loads of pattern and trying to separate it into the blocks of, instead of going in with tone, just like going big with the pattern to separate it into different planes and different sort of sections of the drawing.
Would you plan that out? Something that size?
Um, well, I would do like, probably, in fact, I've probably got it in this sketchbook here, like small, we do have it, very small kind of little tiny versions of it, just to kind of map it out. But I initially started this on format, so big, but like A1 or whatever it was, but it just looked wrong, so I cut a piece off of it to change. So sort of plan to a degree, and then you kind of, I guess, with most work, you just adapt to how it's looking as you're going. And yeah, trying to I this was really an exercise in forcing myself to simplify things, because with like nature and natural forms and plants and things like that, I can get so carried away trying to like get every single leaf, but just it was just no, keep it flatter, just keep it more like icons rather than trying to do exact detail. So yeah, a lot of restraint with that one.
It's really exciting seeing something at that scale as well. Are you intending to do more large drawings?
I'd love to. I mean, um I love doing big things when I do them. I'm so, because I'm so into detail, I just, things end up being small without me meaning them to be small. Um, so it's fun when, you do something that's not the scale that you usually work at. I think it was interesting exercise. Also like planning, because usually if I draw a face, it's quite big because I'm drawing it on a smaller scale, so the features are bigger. Whereas this, I had to redraw the figure multiple times because I kept drawing the head too big and there was no room for the feet. So having to like slightly alter the the height and the size of the feet and etc until it fit within the frame.
Thank you. And if I just click through, this is our last slide as well, but I see the color is coming back.
Yeah, so this is another one. I mean, so this is just like the most recent things that are from, I did a residency at Dumfries House in Scotland, and um it was after a bit of a pause really, because I'd had another surgery at the beginning of the year and I hadn't really made much work, and it was so nice to have an opportunity to just have 2 weeks of just being able to make whatever I wanted. And there was a print room, so even better. And yeah, I think it was fun use, because I'd never used colored inks before, and so I thought, well, I'm here and trying new things, I might as well try different inks. So hence why those two are the colors that they are. But again, it's just interesting seeing how different the etching comes out when it's in color versus if it was black and white. So the top one I sort of played around with afterwards on my phone, and I made it black and white to see how it would look, and it just has a completely different vibe to it. It's just so interesting. You don't think it would make such a difference, but it really, really does. Um, so yeah, those are all from that residency. And then the one on the right is um, another thing that was new to me. I had these little pieces of wood just knocking around, so I took them with me and used them to draw on. And I just quite liked that. I liked the small scale, but it still being like a physical object. There's something quite that I quite liked about it being like not just a piece of paper, because most of my work is paper based. So it's just quite interesting to do something that was more physical. So I think that's something that I'm going to try and do more of further down the line, is more kind of drawing on other surfaces other than just paper.
And is there anything that you have in production at the moment? I'm gonna click to our last slide just so that people can take that down and follow you, but to keep up with what you're doing. But yeah, what are you working on at the minute?
So I think that's what I am going to be pursuing for the moment, is trying to work on things that are not just paper. I'm also getting back into printmaking. I've got plans to go back to the print room at the drawing school, because there's drop-ins, and get back into printmaking, because I haven't done, other than at the residency, I haven't done it in a long time. So yeah, I've got prints that I want to make. I've got so many kind of half finished prints on bits of milk cartons and bits of perspex just like lying around, and I'd like to get them all printed. So those, and yeah, I've got a big piece of MDF that I want to do a drawing on, and in color, hopefully. We'll see.
Excellent. We can watch out for that if that's all right, because that'd be really exciting. Um, Thank you, Leggy.
Thank you.
I'm just going to give people a few moments to ask questions, and I can see Julie's already put a question in just in the chat. Would it be all right to answer a couple of questions towards the
Course,
end?
yeah, yeah. I can't actually see any though. Can you
Yeah, so Julie said, do you think if it had been an invisible surgery, you would have drawn yourself as well? So I guess this is in reference to your mastectomy. Um,
invisible in terms of one that wasn't like a physical change?
I guess so, yeah.
I mean, it depends what it was. I guess there's something about a mastectomy that's quite a big shift. Um, if I was having my tonsils out or something, I don't know, maybe not. I think also the reason I had the surgery was very significant in terms of other things that had happened. So it just felt very kind of I mean, it would do anyway, but it was just very, very, very personal. And yeah, I mean, in a way, it's a weird thing to have something so personal and then to make drawings of it to display. Um, so I don't know. Would I have done? Maybe. I think the drawings of the sort of before and the after, and the drawings of, because I've done drawings of the scars that I now have and stuff like that. I don't that I probably wouldn't have done that had it not been, well, I mean, I definitely wouldn't had it not been a physical change.
Thank you. And for your for exhibition and seeing your work, have you got any exhibitions coming up or any opportunities for people to see your work coming up soon?
I haven't got anything coming up at the moment. I sell my work with something called Wandering People. They're like an online selling exhibition, not exhibition, selling platform, and they do exhibitions a couple of times a year. So possibly with them at some point in the next few years, hopefully.
Okay, we'll watch out for that. And a very important final question. It is our graphite term, so we've got different termly focuses on particular materials. Which grade of pencil would you choose if you could only ever draw in one grade of pencil again?
Oh, that's very difficult. I'd probably be really boring and go somewhere in the middle with something that I could make dark marks with and light marks, maybe like a B.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay. Okay. I'll put you down for a B just in case this horrific situation does ever come up.
put upon me.
Leggy, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you and just it's such a joy to look through your work. So thanks for being so generous sharing it with us.
Thank you. It's been lovely talking to you.
If you've enjoyed this talk and want to be kept up to date on more of our programme or you want to support what we do, you can find more details at patreon.com/drawbrighton.